and welcome back to the ADHD-Friendly podcast. I'm Patty Blinderman. I'm an ADHD coach, and my passion is finding ADHD-friendly ways to bring more ease in my life and my family's life, and I share them here with you in the hopes they do the same in your life. It's another packed episode, and I'm just so excited that if you've stumbled across my podcast and it's the first time you're listening, that you're here. If you're back, welcome back. So today I'm going to share a celebration related to the 4 tendencies. I talked about the 4 tendencies in episode 73, and I am piggybacking right on that in today's episode with a celebration related to them. Then I have an ADHD-friendly tip to slow time down. And then my main topic for today is boundaries. So I'm going to be talking about what they are and how they can be challenging for those of us with ADHD to set and hold them, and how to do that, how to set and hold them with more ease. And then, as I always do at the end of the episode, I'll highlight what's coming up in next week's episode of ADHD Friendly. So let's jump right in to our celebration for this week. And that is, I have an Obliger celebration. So in episode 73, I shared the 4 tendencies work by Gretchen Rubin, and the different tendencies that she includes are questioner, rebel, obliger, and upholder. And I am an obliger. So that means that I am able to meet external expectations if I have accountability, but I struggle to meet internal expectations. So, or I should say, I can meet internal expectations with accountability. I really can meet external ones because the accountability is pretty much built in. So I was really struggling with a number of things on my personal to-do list that I just kept pushing to the following week over and over and over again. And we're now into March, and I just wasn't getting some of these things done, and they really needed to get moved forward. So with the 4 tendencies fresh in my brain, I really took a fresh look at it and thought, well, what can I do to put accountability in here? Because I really am only accountable to myself for these things. And so I told my assistant the 3 things that I wanted to have done. This was last Friday. I said I wanted them done by the time she came in on Monday. And she comes in a little bit later on Monday. So I knew I had time in the morning to get it done if I really targeted time and sat down and got to work on them. So I told her what they were, and I asked her if she'd be willing to check in with me on Monday to see how it went. And I actually gave her that language because I thought about what would I be comfortable with her asking me. And that's, an ADHD friendly tip I want to just build on is when you're asking for an accountability, it's important to notice who's an accountability partner that you're comfortable with. Is it a good fit? Sometimes somebody may not really hold you accountable enough to make it strong enough for you to take action. Other times they might shut you down if you feel like you're going to be judged if you don't do it. So it can backfire. So I asked her to, and I wrote it down on my list. I wrote the 3 things I wanted to do. And then I wrote, please ask me. And I said, please ask me, how did your plan go to get your 3 tasks done? Because I realized if she said something like, did you do it? Or did you do the things that you said you would? That would feel uncomfortable, and it would get in my way if I even thought about that being the way that she checked in. So I wrote down the language I was comfortable with, and it was really, I want to say completely shocking, but at the same time, I know myself as an obliger. I know if I have outside accountability, I'll get things done. What surprised me was how urgent it felt on Monday. I came into my office and I had the 3 things. I went back and I looked at the note I'd written her to make sure that I had the 3 things on my list that I had given her to check in with me about. And then I didn't let myself look at my emails from the weekend or anything else until I did the 3 things. That was a little uncomfortable, but I knew if I started looking at my emails and, comments on my YouTube channel or anything else, I would not have the time to get the 3 things done. It would literally get in my way. That's my pattern. That's not worked for me for weeks. So I just decided, don't even look at them. Just do the 3 things. And then you can look at them and almost like a reward. I can look at the email and I can check comments and anything else I needed to do to get caught up at the beginning of the week. And it worked. I got the 3 things done. It felt incredibly productive. I have to say the most productive Monday I have had in 2023. It was really, really interesting how it played out. So there's my timer to remind me I was transitioning. I'm a little ahead of schedule for recording this. So if you're hearing that in the background, that's just another one of my ADHD friendly tools that I use. That's my time timer. All right. So it worked so well. I am going to continue doing this on Fridays. I'm going to target if there's something that I've been putting off all week that I really need to get done. Can I do it on Monday? And can I ask my assistant to check in with me to see how it went? And then just notice as I continue playing with it, how it works. If it starts to fall off at some point, what would make it work better? But I just wanted to share that in case you're exploring ways to make your tendency for managing expectations work in a little bit more ADHD friendly way for you. Okay, now into my ADHD friendly tip for this week. So it's going to be a tip. And the tip is how to slow time down. And this comes from a Wall Street Journal article called Time is Zooming By, 4 Ways You Can Slow It Down. Anything to do with time is always something I love to study and get some tips on how to manage. And this definitely caught my eye. So I'm bringing it here to share it with you. This comes from a Stanford University behavioral scientist named Dr. Jennifer Aker. And she says, quote, "Most of us feel as though time speeds up as we get older, but that feeling is happening to more people of all ages right now," end quote. I think that's very true. I definitely have experienced that sense that time goes faster the older I get, but I also do know from my entire family and the clients I work with, this is true pretty universally, that we're all feeling like time is just whizzing by. So because this resonates so much with my 2023 goal, word of the year tied to my goals, which is to focus on what's my intention for each activity, for each day. I do try to ground myself more than I was before. What's my intention here? And then my little charm reminding me to live with intention is ever present. So this really resonated. So if I'm slowing time down, what's my intention in slowing it down? What can I do about that? So Dr. Aker says there are 4 ways that we can slow time down. I'm going to share all 4 of them. What I always want to highlight in these episodes is please don't ask yourself to do everything. It's overwhelming. I remember when my kids were young, I stopped reading parenting magazines because it just felt like a list of so many things I needed to do to be a good parent. I couldn't even, everything felt like a homework assignment. So I just want to be sensitive to that and just explore for yourself. If you're noticing time is just cranking by at a faster pace than you would like it to, see if there's something that feels sparkly that you would like to try to slow it down a little bit. So these are just some ideas from Dr. Aker. So the first is structure your day. So Dr. Aker says that she gets this from Dr. Joachim Hansen. And Dr. Hansen says that structuring your day works because a structured day calms our internal pacemaker because they are more predictable. So instead of I think of untethered time is what I call unstructured time. It's like you're kind of floating through time and space without anything really anchoring your day. And this resonated for me because it's like if you anchor down what you need to do at certain times, it lets you easily see the time you have available to do the things that are more fun and play to recharge your batteries. So tip number 1, structure your time. The second way that you can make time slow down is to think big picture. And they talked about focus on larger purpose for your goals. So the example they shared was if you're planning a vacation and you're kind of down in the weeds about, I need to make reservations and I have to decide what we're going to do each day and all of the kind of minutia, it's not very sparkly and really not very fun. So just take a step back and really picture where you're going on vacation and what it's going to look and feel like when you're there. So you're connecting to what it is about the vacation and how nice that trip's going to be to make it easier to do the little tasks that need to happen to get there. So think about the big picture if you're down in the weeds. The third way to slow time down is to give time away. And in this, Dr. Aker says that research shows giving time to others makes us feel as if we have more time. So it's almost counterintuitive that you're giving your time away, but it actually makes you feel like you have more time because doing something for someone else gets you out of your own head. And that's something those of us with ADHD are very good at, staying in our own head. So if doing something for someone else resonates for you, that's a way to use that strategy of giving time away to slow time down. And the number 4 is reach for awe, AWE, awe. So research on awe first of all, I just have to highlight that was like really interesting to me. There's been research done on awe. Research shows that even 10 minutes a day of finding something that you find awe-inspiring enhances your own well-being. So some examples are like building in daily rituals every day. So maybe you're taking 10 minutes to meditate or some time outside in nature, listening to music that inspires awe, having a spiritual experience, or taking a picture of something beautiful and sharing it. Dr. Akers says that even the tree outside your window can inspire awe. I love the simplicity of that. So it doesn't have to be this, because I have to be honest, when I read this one, I was like, oh my gosh, that's where my overwhelm. I was like, how can I even think about doing all of these things? But I like the specific examples to do something small and easy that you can build in every day without effort. And it's actually going to give you something for doing it. So it's building up your energy. So my takeaway was that of all of these 4 things, the number 4, the reach for awe, was the most sparkly for me. And I already do try to take a picture of my son's dog lives with us. He's in college in North Carolina. And I try to take a picture of his dog every few days. And I just thought I can build on this and do it a little bit more intentionally, looking for something else beautiful. So again, I invite you just to think about if there's something here that's sparkly, maybe pick one thing to try to slow down your time a little bit and create a little bit more of a connection to time instead of it feeling so untethered and out of control. You're just managing it with a little bit more intention. Intention. All right, sorry. Okay, so now onto the main topic for today, boundaries. Oh my gosh, such a fascinating topic, such a relevant topic, and really can be very challenging for those of us with ADHD to set boundaries. So I'm going to start by just highlighting the majority of what I'm going to share here comes from the Book of Boundaries by Melissa Urban. She's one of my 2022 ADHD-friendly favorite things was this book. I absolutely adored reading it last year, and I've had a plan to share some of the highlights from the book in a podcast episode, and that time has arrived because I'm doing it today. So boundaries are invisible lines that mark the limits of an area. I like to think of them almost like an invisible fence that you can, that is available for dogs. You can't see it. The dog, can't visibly see it. But just like a physical fence, they know it's there if they've been trained about the limits of where they're able to go in the yard with that invisible fence. So Melissa Urban says, you can set limits when it comes to other people, such as like family or coworkers, friends and neighbors. You can set them around certain conversation topics. So whether it's your weight or your age or politics, religion, you can have boundaries around what you'll talk about. You can have limits around behavior. So it might be like, no smoking in the house, or how fast you'll tolerate somebody driving when you're in the car, or that kind of thing. And you can have limits around your own actions, which are called self-boundaries. So what are your boundaries for yourself, and how will you hold them in place? Melissa says that you are always in charge of where limits lie and of enforcing them. So Melissa says there's 3 steps to boundaries. So the first is to identify that there's even a need for a boundary. And I'm going to share with you some signs that Melissa shares in her book that you might need a boundary. So these are just a list, I invite you to explore. If you can think of an instance or a person this comes up with, it might be a little kind of intuitive hit that you need a boundary here. So do you feel dread or anxiety around a conversational topic? So something that when people talk about, you're like, oh, you get anxious or stressed. Do you consistently avoid certain people? Do you regularly receive unsolicited opinions or comments? Do you feel like a relationship is one-sided? Do you agree to everything so things can go smoothly? Do you feel drained in the presence of someone or after that person leaves? Are you regularly sucked into a person's conflict or drama? Do you feel negative or anxious after spending time with them? And have you considered taking a break from a person or people? So again, those are just signs if you've had these thoughts that you might need a boundary in place. So that's step 1. Step 2 in boundaries is, when it comes to boundaries, clear is kind. Now, a boundary doesn't tell someone else what they're going to do, it tells them what you will do. So this is not you putting something like, you'll need to do this if, it's you saying what you will do if a boundary is not respected and honored. So boundaries come from a desire to establish and preserve your limit. And the part that Melissa Urban shares in her book that really resonated with me is that people are not mind readers. That's a really common thing for those of us with ADHD. We tend to have so much of an intense feeling about something that we can't imagine that somebody doesn't already know. We shouldn't have to say it. It should be clear, but people really aren't mind readers. So we need a way to communicate our limit. And if someone continues to overstep that limit, we need to take action to hold the boundary. People don't need to understand or agree with your boundary to respect it, but a clear boundary doesn't require you to over-explain or to make excuses. That's another ADHD-friendly piece. I think we have a tendency to share more details, but for somebody that's not honoring a boundary, that's often not helpful because they might push back with, oh, well, don't worry about it. You can do that maybe later on when you have more time or something, if you're trying to say no to something. So giving more information like, oh, I'm really busy tomorrow morning. I've got this and this. I'm like, oh, well, you can do it tomorrow afternoon. That's fine. And that really was what you're going for. Okay, step 3, the final step in boundaries is hold the boundary. I think this is probably the toughest part. So for a boundary to be effective, it has to be enforceable and you have to be willing to enforce it. Ideal boundaries have consequences. So Melissa says this is the step that you will take to hold the boundary should the person that you're setting a boundary with be unwilling or unable to respect it. So before setting a boundary, it's important to ask yourself, can I follow through with holding the boundary? Whatever that thing is that you've decided you'll do, if it's not honored, is it something that you could follow through with? If it's not, you might need to step back and revisit, okay, that feels a little bit much. What could I do? Because we don't want to say a boundary and the consequence if we're not able to hold it, if it becomes necessary. The consequence will likely be painful for both of you. And Melissa says this could change the relationship permanently. That's the part that can make setting boundaries really, really difficult, is if we have awareness that they're not going to like a boundary that we set, especially if it's something that we've let go on for a while. And now it almost feels like we have to kind of set a boundary around something that we haven't held a boundary for maybe once or twice, or maybe your whole life. It can be difficult and it very well may change the relationship. So something to consider, Melissa says, to ask yourself, how good is the relationship if the other person won't honor your boundary? I think of that as really like a check-in with, okay, this is uncomfortable, but the result is I'm continuing to tolerate my boundary not being honored. And I'm paying a consequence if I'm not going to enforce a consequence on my boundary not being honored. So I know a lot of challenges when we have ADHD brain wiring can be like, how do you even go about setting a boundary, especially if it's one you haven't set, that you need to now go back and set, that's already been kind of not honored for a while. You haven't really said anything about it. So maybe they didn't realize that you had a boundary around this. What does setting a boundary look like? And most crucial, what do we say? Like, how do you set a boundary? What words do you use? And that's why I loved this book so much, because it gave so many examples of language to use to set boundaries. So she outlines what I call a very ADHD-friendly process for boundary setting. And that's something she calls green, yellow, and red boundaries. So she gives lots of examples of situations where you might need to set a boundary. She has them for neighbors, for romantic partners, for family members, for coworkers and bosses, all different scenarios. And she starts with a green boundary. So I'm just going to read how she defines these. A green boundary is something that she calls low risk. It has the gentlest language. It assumes the other person wasn't aware they were overstepping. So a green example here, I'm going to share this with a neighbor example. So the example that she shares in the book is that you have a friendly neighbor who, when you're not home, is taking your, let's say like your Amazon delivery, comes and is left at your doorstep, and they're going and bringing it inside to be friendly. So an example of a green boundary here could be that you go over to get your package and you say, I really appreciate you looking out for me, but I'd actually prefer my packages are left where they are, even if I'm not home. So you're letting them know, thank you, but no thank you. You prefer them to be left outside. So that's a green boundary. Okay, a yellow boundary, Melissa calls this an elevated risk, and we're going to use firmer language. So she said, when the green boundary wasn't honored, language is clear but more firm. Yellow may include an intended consequence if that's appropriate. So she says sometimes when we do a second yellow boundary, we might not be explicitly mentioning the consequence, but if it's appropriate, you might be doing that here. And so the example with the same neighbor, let's say you told them, please leave it outside, and you come home and you know a delivery was made because you saw it in a message that they sent you and you saw the picture of the package outside, and when you get home, it's not out there. And so you go across from the neighbor and they again have your package. And so the yellow example here for some language of what to say to hold a boundary for the yellow level is, please don't concern yourself with my packages, just leave them where they are. So again, I think, tone of voice is important. If that feels comfortable, if you could say it, if not tweaking it to make it something that you would be comfortable saying. But again, there's no real consequence here. It's just, please leave them. It really doesn't help me if you're taking them inside. And then the highest level for boundaries here is red. And red is something Melissa calls severe risk, and we need direct language. So she said, at this point, your health, safety, and or your relationship are in jeopardy. Your language must reflect the severity of the situation. It is still kind, but this is their last reminder, and it makes it clear you are prepared to hold your limits. State your consequence clearly and be ready to enforce it. This is the part that I know I don't like conflict. So if that resonates for you, this would be like, for me, the hardest part is, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? You're still not honoring it. I always say, like, don't make me have to hold a boundary because I resent having to put the effort and energy in place. But I do want to be really honest, having this language in the examples is a game changer because it's not all dependent on my brain to wait until I'm in a relaxed state where I could think of some, nice language to use. All of that takes a lot of effort for me and my brain. So having these examples does make it much easier. So the red example she gives, so you come home, same thing, package is gone again. So you've already done the green level, you've done the yellow level, and now you're at the red level. And the red level, and I'm going to try not to laugh because I have to say this feels uncomfortable for me. But at the same time, if I really try to think, my neighbor is still taking my packages when I've asked them twice to stop taking my packages. So the red language is, stop taking my packages or I'll need to report this to the HOA. I might end up tweaking that. I don't know if I was in that situation, that still feels uncomfortable for me. But at the same point, if they're still taking my packages, I think I'd be pretty frustrated if I've already put the effort into saying something twice. So I like the example language. I like the idea of having a consequence because it is kind of like, you're not honoring my wishes. I very clearly stated what I want to have happen and you're still not listening. So again, the book is filled with green, yellow, red examples for tons of different scenarios. I've yet to find a scenario I couldn't tweak when it comes up to make it, it's not exactly this, but it's kind of this, I can use the language. So I love that there's so many examples of language to use in her book, The Book of Boundaries. So one other thing that Melissa shares is some tips. There's some general tips on setting boundaries. So she wants to highlight boundary setting is a self-care practice. I love that. It's really, I talked about this when I did my personal owner's manual group. We meet monthly. And I highlighted boundaries in our annual self-care session, which is typically in November, getting ready for the busy holiday season. And I prioritized, how do we focus on self-care and taking care of ourselves? And boundaries is a way that we take care of ourselves. And so I love that she calls it a self-care practice. Second, she says, acknowledge barriers to boundaries. So if you're having a hard time setting a boundary, she wants to really highlight that enlisting the help of a therapist could be needed. So I just want to share that if you are struggling to set boundaries. She says to reframe your inner rebel. So remember your tendency, if you're a rebel, or if you can be and have oblige your rebellion. If it feels too restrictive, reframe the way you identify the consequences of not respecting the boundary. So in the example of the mail, if that felt too strong or too uncomfortable, what would you change to make it something you could say in that moment if they're still not honoring your boundary? Another tip she says is to recruit help. So share your boundary with friends, family, your coach, or your therapist. I like practicing boundaries, like kind of saying it out loud. It can be really uncomfortable if you're not used to setting boundaries. So practice is really, really key. And that actually goes to her next tip. She says, try again. Remember, this is a practice. You won't always set the right limit on the first try. So remember, you're building up like boundary muscles. So allowing yourself to practice, the more practice you allow yourself in setting boundaries, the better you'll get at it, the easier it will be because you'll be building up that muscle. And then she says the most challenging part of boundaries is finding the right words. So use scripts to set boundaries in stressful situations. And like I shared, she has tons of scripts. I've done sessions on boundaries in multiple different ways, in different webinars and groups I've run. I taught it when I was training coaches how to set boundaries. I've never seen clearer, more useful language than I found in the Book of Boundaries by Melissa Urban. So clearly it was what made it one of my 2022 ADHD friendly favorite things, was just the ease I found in the really clear step-by-step levels and language with the examples for each. So remember, it can often feel deeply uncomfortable to state a boundary and let it stand without over-explaining. That's why we need to practice. Even when I practice setting a boundary, I will sometimes still give a little bit more information than I need to give. It takes practice to feel comfortable stating the boundary and stopping and not giving any justification. The most challenging part of setting a boundary is finding the right words. So remember, it's a practice. Give yourself time to think and decide what would work for you in terms of what you would say, and then write it down so you remember what you want to say in the moment, so what you can reflect and use it if you need to. And then I just wanted to share a few examples of some boundaries that I have set in my life, just to get you thinking about where might you need some boundaries if nothing's kind of popping up for you. So I have some kid examples with my children. So for my kids, I always had a rule that a closed door is a visual boundary. You don't just open the door and walk in, you always knock and wait for permission to come in. So that's just a simple boundary, like the boundary is the door shut. And this includes for the kids, like I will not walk in your bedroom if your door is shut. I will knock and wait for permission, because if you're getting changed or whatever, I don't want to, make you uncomfortable. So I'm always going to knock, and I expect you to do the same. I also shared in a previous episode how I would limit my kids to 5 birthday parties a year. They could pick whoever they wanted to go to the birthday party, but there was a maximum of 5 because I have 4 kids, and I didn't want to spend every weekend of the year running them around to birthday parties. So I put a limit on that, and they, kind of they had to learn how to respect that boundary because they only got to go to 5 non-family member birthday parties. And then in my business, some boundaries that I've set are that I had an assistant that was scheduling clients on my calendar with less than 24 hours notice. And I noticed that really didn't work for me. If I could come into the office in the morning, wasn't expecting certain things on my calendar, and I planned to do certain things, and then there were clients on my calendar that I wasn't expecting, that my mind, cognitive flexibility is not a really good strength of mine. And I just noticed that was really challenging for me. So I put a boundary in place that I did not want clients added to my schedule with less than 24 hours notice. And then I have company boundaries. So this, again, it's kind of another kid one, but it relates to company. I would tell my kids, you can have your friends over, but it is your guest in our home. When they're here, you need to be taking care of them. If they're thirsty or they want a snack, you're cleaning up after you guys are done playing or whatever. And if I have to work while they're here, they will not be repeat visitors. So they learned from a very young age what I expected boundary wise in order for them to have the freedom to be able to request friends come over and play. Because if they didn't do what they needed to do to take care of their friends when they were here and clean up when they left, or before they left, so they weren't having to clean up on their own, then they weren't repeat visitors. And then for pets, I have pet boundaries. So we have pugs. And so I've always been really mindful about them not getting too heavy, because pugs can, they're little dogs and they like to eat. So they can really easily become overweight and have health problems. So I've always had a rule, no people food, period, just no people food. So there's no need to give them, any of your scraps. It's just a boundary, no people food. And then I also have no big dogs on furniture. I had a leather sofa years ago that got destroyed by a large dog from jumping up on it. And I just okay, we can't do it. No big dogs on furniture. And if you want to, have the dog lay in your lap, then you can sit on the floor and they can lay in your lap, but they're not going to go on the furniture. So just deciding, in which areas of your life would a boundary support you to manage your energy with a little bit more ease because you're not expending it all holding boundaries or getting frustrated over boundaries not being respected that either aren't being honored or that you haven't shared is your boundary. And I'm going to wrap up our little part here on boundaries with a quote from Melissa Urban. Melissa says, when you successfully set a boundary in one area of your life, it gives you the confidence to set limits in other areas too. And when you start showing up everywhere with more confidence, energy, capacity, and grace, there is nothing in your life that won't change for the better because you've changed it for the better with boundaries. I love that. So great. All right. So to recap from this episode, I started at the top of the episode with a celebration related to my tendency, which is obliger, where I asked for accountability from my assistant. And I'm going to continue doing that, targeting Monday morning tasks that I'm going to be accountable for. And I'm just going to continue to notice how it works and if I need to tweak it. But it worked so well, I'm definitely going to continue it. And then I shared an ADHD-friendly tip to slow time down. There were 4 ways that I shared and how I've decided I'm going to focus on the all one. I'm going to look for one thing a day instead of trying to focus on all 4 of the different ways to slow time down. So I just invite you to notice what was sparkly for you if you would like to try one of the different ways to slow your time down a little bit. Pick one, run an experiment, play, post it in the comments if you do try it. I'd love to hear what you noticed and how it worked. And then our main topic for today was around boundaries, inspired by the Book of Boundaries by Melissa Urban. I'll have a link if you'd like to get the book. I actually have it in the ADHD-friendly.com, my website. It's in the shop there under the 2022 ADHD-friendly favorite things list. You'll find it right there if you're interested in checking it out and you want to buy it. And remember, it can be challenging for anyone to set boundaries, but it can be even more challenging for those of us with ADHD. So remember the 3 tips to boundaries. First, identify that a boundary is needed. Second, clear is kind when it comes to boundaries. So remember, people are not mind readers. So just being really clear about what your boundary is so that they have a chance to honor it. And then if they don't honor it, number 3 is hold the boundary. Next episode, next week, I'm going to be talking about something I'm calling the home field advantage. This is, something that's very true in sports, but I think it's also true in our homes and in our offices. So when you think about what works for you, I'm going to share what I think of as my home field advantage, how I set up my environment to work for my brain. And I'm even going to give a tour of my ISM room. If you've listened to my podcast before, ISM is my acronym for Insight in Mind. I have a whole room dedicated to my work in a very visible way. And I'll share that next time. Until then, tally ho.